There's a special kind of fear that lives in old family farmhouses. The kind that seeps into the wooden floors, rides through the hollow walls, and whispers through the hayfields at night. Welcome to Night Encounters. Tonight, we'll wander through 3 allegedly true horror stories, each one told by someone who swears they lived through something they can't quite explain, far from help, surrounded by silence, inside old family farmhouses that carry their own secrets. Remember, these are not ghost stories. At least, not in the way you might think. Story 1: The Locked Room in My Grandfather's House by Aaron W. I spent the summer of 2017 helping my grandfather fix up his old farmhouse in southern Illinois. It had been in the family for generations, white paint peeled from the siding, rusted windmill turning lazy circles beside the barn. I was 19 and short on money, so when Grandpa said he'd pay me to help clear out the house before he sold it, I jumped at the offer. I thought it'd be peaceful, patching floorboards, oiling hinges, mowing overgrown grass. Most of the rooms were cluttered with old furniture and boxes. But the door at the end of the upstairs hallway was different. It was locked. Always had been, Grandpa said. Storage, he called it, but I noticed how his face tightened when he said that word. I didn't press. 3 weeks in, I was working late, fixing window frames, when I heard something above me. A heavy dragging sound, slow, deliberate, coming from that locked room. I froze mid-step, hammer in hand. I told myself it was a raccoon in the attic. But deep down, I felt that tightening in my gut. That awareness when something in your surroundings shifts from normal to wrong. When I mentioned it the next morning, Grandpa didn't look surprised. Just said, "Don't go messing with that door, Aaron. That side of the house isn't safe." Over the next few days, it happened again, always after dark. Dragging. Sometimes a faint thumping, like footsteps pacing. Once, while I was carrying laundry downstairs, I caught a whisper under the sliding of the wind outside. Not words exactly, more like hushed murmurs. I told myself it was the breeze catching the eaves just right. One night, while I was in bed, I heard the door handle upstairs jiggle. Slow, testing. Then stop. I sat up, holding my breath. Everything was silent, the thick kind of quiet where even the night insects seemed to listen. 2 nights after that, I couldn't help it. Curiosity and fear pushed me to grab Grandpa's spare key ring and try the padlock. My hand shook, the metal clinking louder than it should have in the still air. When I finally unlocked it, the door creaked open to a small, dust-choked bedroom. Old baby crib, rocking chair, boxes stacked to the ceiling. One lamp cord dangled from the ceiling, but no bulb. Then something hit my nostrils, a strong smell of rot. Not animal, exactly, something older. I turned my flashlight toward the crib and saw deep scratch marks along the inside rails. Long grooves carved into the wood. That's when the air seemed to change. I heard movement behind me, slow breathing, then the softest floorboard creak. I whipped around, nothing there. But the flashlight flickered, then died. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran. I didn't sleep that night. I left the next morning. Told Grandpa I got a job offer back home. He didn't argue. Just nodded. A month later, when he sold the house, I asked what he kept in that room. He hesitated, then said quietly, "That was your mother's room when she was little, until she wasn't right anymore." That's all he'd say. To this day, I don't know what those sounds were, or why that smell lingered only when the door was open. I just know that sometimes, at night, when I can't sleep, I think I still hear that slow, dragging sound, somewhere far off, like it's waiting for me to listen again. Story 2, The Stranger in the Field Road, by Megan R. My parents' farmhouse sits on about 30 acres in rural Ohio, miles from the nearest neighbor. I grew up there, left for college, and came back one winter to help while my mom recovered from surgery. It was January, bitter cold, and I was alone most nights while Dad stayed at the hospital. The land was endless rows of empty fields then, coated in snow. The silence was the part that got me, deep and heavy, like sound just dissolved in the air. The first weird thing happened while closing up the barn one night. I saw footprints in the snow leading from the road up to the shed, only one trail in, none out. I scanned the fields but saw nothing but grain silos in the dim moonlight. My chest tightened. I tried to reason, maybe a delivery guy turned around. But it was 10:30 p.m., and this road never got visitors. A few nights later, I was in the kitchen when the motion light outside flicked on. I looked out the window, nothing. Just the yellow cone of light cutting across the stack of wood by the fence. Then, faintly, a noise. Footsteps crunching snow, steady, moving around the side of the house. I grabbed my dad's old revolver, he kept it over the pantry. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The next morning, I found cigarette butts by the back porch, fresh, half buried in snow. Dad doesn't smoke. We haven't had guests in months. I started locking every door twice, leaving the lights on all night. It all came to a head the fifth night. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to soft knocking at the side door. Not the front, the one that faced the empty cornfield. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 2 more. I stood at the top of the stairs, holding the phone, too afraid to breathe. When I looked out the window, I saw him, a man standing just outside the light, wearing a hooded jacket. His face was hidden. He lifted his hand toward the window, then just stood there. I called the police, whispering so he wouldn't hear. Took them 20 minutes to arrive. By the time they pulled up, the man was gone. But they did find prints, circled the house twice, then led off into the fields. He never came back, but I left the next day. Couldn't stand the silence anymore. Later, Dad said the sheriff told him they'd had similar reports. A drifter, maybe. Someone transient, casing rural homes that looked empty. Maybe that's all it was. Still, every time I visit that farmhouse and step onto that porch, I see those faint old prints burned into the snow in my memory. And I can't help but think about how long he must have stood there, just watching, waiting for the light to go out. Story 3, The Tenant in the Cellar, by Liam K. I inherited my aunt's farmhouse outside of Bangor, Maine, after she passed in 2015. It was a weather-beaten, 2-story house sitting on a sloping hill surrounded by pine woods. I hadn't been there since I was 10, but I remembered it as quiet, a little lonely, the kind of silence that seemed to press down on your ears. I moved in that spring to save money, planning to renovate and eventually rent it out. The only part of the house I hated was the cellar. Wood steps, dirt floor, barely any light. Every sound from down there carried through the vents at night. At first, everything seemed fine, until I started noticing my tools moving. One morning, I went down to look for my flashlight and found it sitting on the cellar steps, turned on. I hadn't used it since the night before. The batteries had been dying, but now it was bright. Too bright. I remember laughing nervously to myself, thinking maybe I'd left it like that by accident. But that nagging feeling settled in, that heavy dread deep in the stomach. The sense something was watching. That night, I swear I heard faint movement through the vent by my bed, a soft scrape, then a shuffle. The next few days were filled with small disturbances. My ladder was moved to the opposite wall of the cellar. Jar lids loosened. Footprints leading out of a damp corner where the dirt floor was soft. I kept trying to justify it. Maybe I stepped there earlier. Maybe I forgot. But it felt off. One night, I went down with my phone flashlight and stopped halfway down the stairs when I saw light reflecting off metal in the far corner, like a can. The air smelled like stale food and sweat. Then a sound came from the dark, breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing that was definitely not mine. I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I felt it echo in my skull. The next morning, I called the local sheriff. He sent 2 deputies who searched the house and cellar. Nothing. But that night, I heard it again, footsteps, muffled movement. I grabbed a kitchen knife and dialed 911. While I was on the call, the vent in the hallway rattled, violently this time, like someone crawling through from below. The deputies arrived again 20 minutes later. This time, they found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and an old camping lantern stashed behind the stacked boxes down there. Someone had been living under my house for at least a week. They never caught whoever it was. The deputies said it might have been a drifter, maybe someone using abandoned houses through the woods. I moved out the next day and sold the place within the month. The new owner called me a year later to ask about a noise he heard from the vents, like faint scratching. I told him I didn't know what he meant. Then I blocked his number. Whatever was down there, I think it knew every sound in that house. Every footstep I ever made. Story 4, The Light in the Empty Barn by Carla M. My grandparents owned a farm in northern Kansas, about 10 miles from town. They passed when I was in my early 30s, and I inherited the place, not because I wanted it, but because no one else did. The farmhouse was simple and quiet, fields laid out like a faded painting. The barn sat about 100 yards away down a dirt path. It hadn't been used in decades, but the roof and walls were still solid. When I stayed there, nights were long and completely silent. No cars, no crickets, nothing. Just wind through the grass. My second night, I stepped outside to lock the truck and saw a light flicker from inside the barn. Not a flashlight beam, more like an old bulb glowing red for a second, then fading. I thought maybe a wire had shorted, though I hadn't touched the power yet. I told myself I'd check it in the morning. But as I turned back, I noticed the barn sliding door was cranked halfway open. I was sure I'd left it closed. My stomach dropped. That same low ache of unease settled in again. Over the next few nights, the light kept showing up, Always around 1 a.m., always faint and short. Once, I saw a silhouette move across the gap in the barn door, slow, deliberate. I remember stepping backward toward the house, whispering to myself that it had to be a trick of the moonlight. But when I checked in the morning, I found footprints, bare ones, leading out of the barn toward the back fields. They looked fresh, pressed deep into the dirt. That's when it hit me that whoever was out there wasn't trying to hide. On the 5th night, I finally decided to wait with a flashlight and my grandfather's old shotgun. I sat by the front window, watching the path through the trees. The light appeared again, soft orange glow bleeding out from the cracks in the barn siding. I approached slowly, heart rattling in my chest. Each crunch of gravel felt deafening. When I got close enough, I saw it was actually a lantern hanging from a support beam, lit, swaying slightly, as if someone had just walked away from it. The air smelled like smoke and iron. I moved deeper inside. That's when I saw them, 5 small piles of rocks in a row against the far wall, each topped with something different: a button, a spoon, a lock of hair. I don't remember dropping the shotgun, but I heard the clang echo forever. That's when the lantern went out. I ran back to the house, locked every door, and didn't sleep. The sheriff came the next morning but found nothing: no footprints, no lantern, no piles of rocks. Just empty dirt. I left 2 days later and never went back. Sometimes I wonder if there's a logical explanation: kids, squatters, someone trying to scare me. But something about those objects on top of the rocks felt wrong. Something personal. And at night, when I close my eyes, I can still see that dying orange glow through the barn slats, like it's waiting for me to remember it. Story 5: The Missing Axe by Daniel S. My family's farmhouse sits on the edge of a dense forest in upstate Pennsylvania. I went back in 2021, 2 years after my father died, to clear out the house and decide what to do with the property. Most of my trip was sorting through junk, stacking firewood, fixing up the kitchen. The only thing I kept with me outside was the old axe Dad used for splitting logs, heavy, blade-worn but reliable. I always felt comfortable on the porch, looking out at the woods. The house didn't feel haunted. Just old. On the 4th day, I realized the axe was missing. I hunted all around the yard, retracing my steps. Then I noticed something strange: muddy footprints leading from the far edge of the property, across the back porch, up to the axe stand, and then disappearing back toward the woods. My first thought was maybe someone from town had come by for firewood. But no one ever did that, especially with my truck parked out front. My stomach tightened. I felt watched, but the yard was empty as ever. The next night, I heard noises at the edge of the forest, branches cracking, underbrush rustling. I stayed in the house and locked the doors. Every time I peered out, I saw nothing but darkness. On the 5th morning, I found fresh shavings on the porch. Someone had been using the axe to split wood next to the kitchen window. That night, footsteps woke me up, heavy, measured, too close. I lay still, straining to hear, heart pounding and mouth dry. The back door creaked softly, then stopped. I pushed a chair against the knob and sat up in bed, shotgun on my lap, all night. Near dawn, as the first light seeped through the windows, I heard a single hard knock on the front door. Too deliberate. I waited and didn't move, feeling frozen. When I finally looked out, there was no one there. But the axe had been returned to its stand, cleaned, perfectly placed, blade glinting with fresh oil. Next to it was a folded scrap of paper, "Thanks for sharing." That unfamiliar, shaky handwriting felt somehow mocking. I packed up and left as soon as the sun was high. The sheriff said there'd been squatter activity in the area, and occasionally break-ins. Maybe someone was just passing through. Maybe it was some kind of warning. Even now, I sometimes think about the way the axe felt, how comfortable I was with it, how someone else must have felt the same in those woods. I'll never know who took it, or why. But every time I see an axe now, my stomach drops, and I remember how close the woods seemed on those silent mornings. There's something about old family farmhouses, their long histories, untouched corners, and the quiet that settles deeper every year. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't what's imagined, but what's left behind. The unanswered knocks. The missing objects. The moments when someone, or something, crosses the line between outside and in. If you have a true, original story you'd like to share with Night Encounters, please email us at nightencountersstories@gmail.com. We're always here to listen, even when no one else is around.